The Bogosity Podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of October 6, 2024. The podcast that's not rocket science. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's prelate the news of the bogus. And we've got another lawsuit in Georgia around their horribly insecure voting machines. We've been covering one lawsuit that's been going on since 2018, where earlier this year, a cybersecurity expert exploited a Dominion machine live on the stand using nothing but a ballpoint pen, getting root access not only to the voting machine, but the regional server. In this new lawsuit, the DeKalb County Republican Party has sued Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger for failing to comply with Georgia election statutes by allowing Dominion to keep its encryption key unsecure. They allege that this statutory violation is statewide and exposes their machines to easy access for hackers. In fact, as their expert demonstrated on the stand, their encryption keys were all stored in plain text. In other words, they might as well not have encrypted it at all. They filed a writ of mandamus, which means they want the court to order the state to apply fixes to the machines. They filed, "The circumstances described herein present a grave and urgent cybersecurity risk to the integrity of Georgia elections and warrant expeditious mandamus relief to safeguard Georgia's elections. Applicant requests that the court enter a mandamus absolute, ordering the defendant to immediately bring the Dominion systems used in Georgia elections into compliance with Georgia law as aforesaid and as to be shown at any hearing in this matter." They showed that the machines have been in an illegally insecure state at least since 2020 and may have already been compromised by malicious actors. And there's no way to tell because the system isn't logging anything at all. Moreover, information from the open records request shows that for the last 14 years, every system was set up with the same default administrative password DVS Corp 08 Bang, which is widely known among analysts and confirmed in a report back in 2012. Activists have said they're going to print the password on t-shirts in protest. Cybersecurity expert Clay Parikh demonstrated on the stand that you could easily see the passwords and encryption keys on the server. In fact, these were easily accessible by the public, and said that anyone exploiting these on one Dominion machine could use it as a launching off point to access others.
As a cybersecurity professional, how would you characterize that method of storing encryption keys?
It's egregious. In general terms, and I work in the cybersecurity realm, and I work with gentlemen who've got a year, 2 years experience, and then some who have as much as I do. And I just say, hey, what would you think about if the secret encryption key was stored in a database in plain text? And the very first thing you say, well, was the database encrypted? And I'm like, no. Well, how did you authenticate to the database? Well, I use the operating system. And they're just like, their minds are blown.
So what does it mean for the security of the system that the encryption keys are stored in plain text in the election database?
There is no security.
And since there was no logging, that means you couldn't even tell if anyone had ever done it.
If a bad actor got a hold of these encryption keys, what could they do?
They could change the configuration settings on the components. They could manipulate. They could create election data and encrypt it and make it seem legitimate when the system takes it in and evaluates it. You know, there's the saying, 1,000 ways to skin this cat. There's about 2,000 ways to skin this with those keys.
And would such changes or such actions be detectable on these systems?
No, they would not.
They also played a video of Parikh compromising the system and explaining step by step how easy it is to do. System logs aren't proprietary. They contain no confidential information. Parikh recommended transparency with secure log files so that the public can tell for themselves if a system has been compromised. and it's just as simple as turning on logging.
If there was a requirement to produce promptly system logs, ballot images, and cast vote records, would that help?
Yes, sir, it would.
And would that change the voter's user experience on the machines in any way?
Not in any way, sir.
And are those records already exist in the ordinary operation of the system?
Yes, sir. The only thing that I would add on that is to ensure that all ballot images are retained. A lot of them, to include my own state, do not retain them all. And to me, that is a digital chain of custody infraction. You've lost the chain of custody.
He went on in detail showing how insecure the system is, as did Benjamin Cotton, who talked about the importance of authentication and how the Dominion machines didn't do any.
If an insider or an unauthorized person could gain access to that SD card and had access to the encryption keys, they could decrypt the results, change the results, modify the ballot images on that SD card to conform with those changed results, re-encrypt it, re-SHA hash it, and submit that to the EMS, and the EMS wouldn't know the difference.
As a matter of cyber security, how would you characterize that situation?
Well, it depends on how I'm looking at it. If I'm looking at it from a hacker's point of view, hallelujah. If I'm looking at it from a cybersecurity perspective, I can't believe that anybody would ever do this.
And both of them said that these same vulnerable systems were the ones used in Arizona, Colorado, and several other states.
The opportunity I've had to look at different systems across different states gives me a unique perspective of what that vulnerability could do. And so that 509 value is the same in every single Dominion system that I've looked at, regardless of version and regardless of jurisdiction. What that means is that if anyone with that certificate can get access to the same network address space, then they can remotely establish trust with that voting system, execute APIs or direct interaction with that system without really needing to know the user password for the Windows system.
The two experts also said that the Dominion software and the Windows systems they run on hadn't had any virus updates since 2019. No Windows patches have been applied. Cotton said the Dominion machines were, quote, wide open and a total lack of cybersecurity. Parikh called it, quote, gross negligence. Both of them said the average home computer is more secure and better protected than these voting machines, and both agreed that even air-gapped systems were vulnerable, including live connections to the internet, specifically mail.live.com. On cross, when the state kept saying there were security techniques in place, Cotton replied,
You've got somebody guarding it. His name's Barney Fife. And he's got one bullet and he's asleep in the car, then that's really not protection. But it is a technique.
Both the filing and the witnesses said that mitigation should be the top priority in this election, and adding on basic transparency isn't overly burdensome to the state, wouldn't affect user experience at all, and is simple to implement. The only argument the state had on cross was to just keep saying, but you can't prove someone's going to hack it. Of course, as their testimony showed, even if someone already has hacked it and is actively hacking it, there'd be no way for anyone to know about it. They were just trying to blame the plaintiffs for not having the information the state was too negligent to collect. And of course, there's the usual screeching about Trump and how he keeps lying he really won when he knows he lost. I'm just going to let Cotton close out this segment on that thought.
This is not about rehashing the 2020 election. This is about restoring the confidence and faith of all Americans in the foundation of our democracy, which is the voting process. If we can't prove or demonstrate to them that this process is secure and that we can detect if there's something going on, then I think that what we saw subsequent to the 2020 election is going to continue forward in the next foreseeable future with whoever lost bringing these up as issues for the general public.
If you're looking for a way to support this channel, but you don't have any spare cash and you can't stand ads, you can do so by generating your own cryptocurrency. Use the links at the bottom of the description to follow the link to Odyssey.com to listen to the podcast and see all of my YouTube videos as well. Just watching videos will produce cryptocurrency for the creator and yourself. And since Odyssey is always monetized and never censored, you'll have no problem seeing all the videos from your favorite creators. You can also use the library credits you create at Odyssey to tip creators and even purchase paid content. Earn library credits through various rewards, including daily view rewards and the number of shares and invites. And you can interact with creators in all sorts of ways, including like and dislike, comment, boost a post by supporting it, repost it, and share to other sites, all while earning crypto for the creator. Easily monetize yourself and your favorite creators using cryptocurrency without advertising. Use the link below to visit this channel on Odyssey.com and see many of your other favorites there as well. Okay, some good news. A judge has blocked that free speech hating California law restricting deepfakes. In other words, unreal content made with CGI or increasingly AI when related to elections. We talked about this. This is the one where Gavin Newsom got all triggered about a satire someone made of Kamala Harris that we played last time. It was completely obvious as a parody, so this is just them not being able to take a joke. But the excuse was that people just might be fooled. And what just might be a record, less than 2 weeks later, a judge threw out the law before it even had a chance to go into effect. The case is Kohls v. Bonta, where Christopher Kohls sued as a maker of digital content parodying public figures, specifically that self-same Harris parody we just mentioned. Remember that even deliberately false, non-parody speech is protected as per New York Times v. Sullivan. Judge John A. Mendez issued a preliminary injunction against the law going into effect. He ruled, AB 2839 does not pass constitutional scrutiny because the law does not use the least restrictive means available for advancing the state's interest here. As plaintiffs persuasively argue, counterspeech is a less restrictive alternative to prohibiting videos such as those posted by a plaintiff, no matter how offensive or inappropriate someone may find them. Especially as to political speech, counterspeech is the tried and true buffer and elixir, not speech restriction. And they tried to use the old defamation excuse when that was rejected for public figures. Quote, while defendants attempt to analogize AB 2839 to a restriction on defamatory statements, the statute itself does not use the word defamation and by its own definition extends beyond the legal standard for defamation to include any false or materially deceptive content that is reasonably likely to harm the reputation or electoral prospects of a candidate. At face value, AB 2839 does much more than punish potential defamatory statements, since the statute does not require actual harms and sanctions any digitally manipulated content that is reasonably likely to harm the amorphous electoral prospects of a candidate or elected official. Thus, even artificially manipulated content that does not implicate reputational harm but could arguably affect a candidate's electoral prospects is swept under this statute and subject to civil liability. I mean, that's all political speech, right? Because all of it's designed to harm the electoral prospects of somebody. But in reality, it would only be used against those speaking out against the current regime, who would be the ones in power and with the means of prosecuting them. And the fear-mongering just doesn't pass muster. Quote, Supreme Court precedent illuminates that while a well-founded fear of a digitally manipulated media landscape may be justified, this fear does not give legislators unbridled license to bulldoze over the long-standing tradition of critique, parody, and satire protected by the First Amendment. YouTube videos, Facebook posts, and X tweets are the newspaper advertisements and political cartoons of today, and the First Amendment protects an individual's right to speak regardless of the new medium these critiques may take. And it's also quite dangerous in that it requires the state to be an arbiter of truth. Quote, to quote Justices Breyer and Alito and Alvarez, there are broad areas in which any attempt by the state to penalize purportedly false speech would present a grave and unacceptable danger of suppressing truthful speech. It is perilous to permit the state to be the arbiter of truth in certain settings. The political context is one such setting that would be especially perilous for the government to be an arbiter of truth in. AB 2839 attempts to sterilize electoral content and would open the door for the state to use its power for political ends. Even a false statement may be deemed to make a valuable contribution to public debate, since it brings about the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by its collision with error. When political speech and electoral politics are at issue, the First Amendment has almost unequivocally dictated that courts allow speech to flourish rather than uphold the state's attempt to suffocate it. Even requiring a disclaimer is problematic, since it not only comprises forced speech, also a First Amendment violation, but can ruin the entire effect of a parody. Quote, in Plaintiff Kohls' case, this requirement renders his video almost unviewable, obstructing the entirety of the frame. The obstructiveness of this requirement is concerning, because parody and satire have relayed creative and important messages in American politics. And he quoted the Supreme Court in Hustler v. Falwell saying, despite their sometimes caustic nature, from the early cartoon portraying George Washington as an ass down to the present day, graphic depictions and satirical cartoons have played a prominent role in public and political debate. Notice also how this doesn't apply to false or misleading statements without any AI requirement. But then Newsom and all of his buddies would be in jail if you did that. What's most ridiculous about this is just how many times courts have had to strike down states and other politicians to make this clear to them.
If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv.
Now let's look at another court case, this time an injunction that didn't go so well for people fighting Utah's age verification law. Utah is one of several states that's passed a blindingly unconstitutional age verification law for viewing adult websites, as we've covered several times before. But the district court, and now the 10th Circuit, have said they can't do anything about it because of how Utah legislators sneakily wrote the law. Taking a cue from Texas's anti-abortion law and California's anti-gun law, they made it a bounty law, also known as a vigilante law, where any citizen can bring suit against anyone else through a private action, and if they win, they're awarded a bounty. Yes, that's every bit the open door for frivolous lawsuits, it seems. And that's why the Free Speech Coalition has run into a wall challenging this in court. Normally what you see in cases like this is a facial challenge, where a person or group brings a case against legislation itself to have it declared unconstitutional. That's in contrast to an as-applied challenge, which is generally what happens when the law is used against someone and they fight it in court. To do a facial challenge, you bring suit against the person who would be enforcing the law, generally the state attorney general. In the last segment, the case was Kohls v. Bonta and not Kohls v. California, because California AG Rob Bonta is the one who'd be enforcing the law. But in this case, it's not the AG or anyone else in the government who'd be bringing suit. It's just whatever rando wanted to. So there's no possible way to bring a facial challenge. You'd have to wait for the law to take effect and then find someone to sue. That's what happened with Plessy v. Ferguson. A group wanted to challenge segregation and enlisted Homer Plessy to violate the law. The East Louisiana Railroad, who opposed the law because it would mean them having to buy more cars and have longer trains, looked the other way while Plessy boarded a whites-only car. The group had also hired a private detective to make the arrest, and they took it to court. Sadly, it backfired, with Judge Howard Ferguson upholding the law, and it failed all the way up to the notorious Supreme Court ruling, resulting in 60 years of racial segregation before Brown v. Board of Education. That's the game that Utah is playing here. The coalition sued on First Amendment grounds by imposing a content-based restriction on speech that fails strict scrutiny, and a 14th Amendment violation of due process and equal protection by being unconstitutionally vague, intruding on fundamental liberty and privacy rights, and drawing content-based distinctions among persons engaged in free speech. They sued Jess Anderson, Commissioner of the Utah Department of Public Safety, and Utah Attorney General Sean Reyes. They want the court to say this is unconstitutional. That's all they're asking for, and this should be a no-brainer. But judges are cowardly little toadies who always let the technicalities of the law overrule their oaths of office. They declared that the state officials have sovereign immunity because, quote, neither defendant enforced or gave effect to the allegedly unconstitutional act for purposes of the Ex parte Young exception. They had sued Anderson because she runs the program that requires the ID cards in the first place. But that isn't enforcing the law because reasons. Quote, nothing in the Act expressly refers to the MDL program or promises a state-sponsored means of age verification, so the Commissioner has no such duty to begin with. Nor does the MDL statute require the online functionality that would allow it to operate as a means of complying with the Act. For this reason, the Commissioner neither enforces nor gives effect to the allegedly unconstitutional act for the purposes of the Ex parte Young exception. So, even though she's enforcing it, she's not enforcing it. Same with the AG, quote, the Attorney General does not enforce or give effect to the act, and thus cannot be named as a defendant in this case under the Ex parte Young exception to 11th Amendment immunity. And because both defendants are immune from suit, we affirm the district court's dismissal order without reaching the issues of ripeness and constitutional standing. In other words, take a hike. Quote, the state sovereign immunity enshrined in the 11th Amendment confers immunity on the Attorney General and the Commissioner in their official capacities, and because neither official enforces or gives effect to the act, the Ex parte Young exception to that immunity does not apply. We therefore affirm the district court's order dismissing plaintiff's complaint. One judge dissented, Gregory Phillips, and he was actually using his brain, quote, as I see it, because the Commissioner oversees the MDL program, the only state-approved compliance mechanism available to the plaintiffs, he has a sufficient nexus with SB 287's enforcement to be a proper defendant under Ex parte Young. To me, if a state-run program that functions as intended gives effect to another law by providing the only state-approved mechanism by which to comply with that other law, then by virtue of its existence and its scope, it gives effect to that law, regardless of whether or not it currently functions as intended. He also explained how the plaintiffs have standing and that their claims against the Commissioner are ripe. Quote, let's not forget that this case presents a First Amendment challenge, where ripeness inquiries are relaxed due to the chilling effect that potentially unconstitutional burdens on free speech may occasion. Indeed, ripeness is seldom an obstacle to a pre-enforcement challenge in this posture, where the plaintiff faces a credible threat of enforcement and should not be required to await and undergo enforcement as the sole means of seeking relief. SB 287 creates a credible threat of liability, and the plaintiff should not be required to await and undergo a civil suit to seek relief. In sum, the plaintiff's claims against the commissioner are ripe because the plaintiff's injuries are already occurring and are exacerbated by the MDL program's lack of online functionality for which the commissioner is responsible. The good news is the coalition already has the Texas age verification law going before the Supreme Court. They've granted cert and will hear the case sometime this term. Theoretically, that should take down the Utah law, but the question would still be, who do you sue to make that happen? And would this work with any other defendant? I didn't make them beat the guy up. I just gave them a billy club and paid them to use it. Maybe bounty laws themselves should be considered unconstitutional.
Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-aged children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins.
And now it's time to denationalize this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And this week it goes to VP candidate Tim Walz for an absolutely horrible answer he gave in his debate with J.D. Vance. After Walz kept trying to pivot every answer back to January 6, Vance was able to turn the tables.
But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government.
The only part he got right is that true threats are unprotected, but they have to pass the imminent lawless action standard. So-called hate speech is absolutely protected, as is misinformation. And that's when he said the part that will make anyone familiar with the First Amendment, and longtime listeners of this podcast, cringe.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
No, it is not, you Teutonic twit! You absolutely can yell fire in a crowded theater. Well, the owner can kick you out, but the government can't do anything to you. Just to review, the phrase comes from a horrible Supreme Court case called Schenck v. United States, where Charles Schenck and a few others were arrested for printing leaflets protesting the draft in World War I. The court unanimously upheld the arrest of a protester, someone engaging in what absolutely should be protected First Amendment activity. The quote comes from Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., writing for a unanimous court. The most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic. That was finally overturned with Brandenburg v. Ohio, which applied the real test, imminent lawless action. So no, it isn't the Supreme Court test. But it wasn't even the test pre-Brandenburg. It couldn't be because Schenck had nothing to do with fires or theaters. Holmes was engaging in dicta, which is a fancy Supreme Court way of saying talking out of your ass. You can yell fire in a crowded theater. That, as anyone who knows anything about free speech will tell you, is absolutely protected under the First Amendment. Even Holmes himself walked back the statement a few years later. Too bad J.D. Vance doesn't understand it either, or he could have taken this opportunity to educate the viewing public about it. Misinformation is protected too, by the way, as confirmed by the Sullivan decision I mentioned earlier in the podcast, which is good for Walz because otherwise he could get life in prison. Here's how the exchange went from there.
That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to
Please
respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump?
And this guy's a school teacher. The only thing scarier than that is him being vice president. Wanting to reverse course more than 100 years to a standard that would allow the government to imprison you for merely disagreeing with their policy. Well, now that I say that out loud, it is pretty on brand for the Harris administration. So all of that makes Tim Walz this week's biggest Bogon emitter.
I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv.
And now let's revivify this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And this week it goes to the Godot Foundation, makers of the open source Godot game engine, which could be titled How to Completely Ruin Your Project in 3 Easy Steps. And yes, I know I'm using Know Your Meme as the main source in the show notes, but only because they've done such a good job of documenting all of this. It started on September 24 with a sarcastic ex-post from Christoph Janssen who quipped, "Woke studios always use pre-built engines to make games because they can't build their own engines." The next day, Natalie Spitzel replied, "Sorry, fellow devs, I guess game engines are woke TM." So that apparently inspired the official X account for Godot to tweet, "Apparently, game engines are woke now? Well, then we won't complain. Rainbow emoji. Show us your #WOKO games below. Finger pointing down emoji." I have no clue what they were thinking, but it seemed pretty harmless to me. I mean, it's your basic virtue signaling, but no more than that. It's what they did next that was horrible. Many users, including several developers, criticized Godot for making the post, such as Cosmic SCR, who posted, "I deeply believe that any political discussion that puts labels to a group of people is one that should not have started." He was quoting Juan Linietsky, the creator of Godot. He then reported that Godot had blocked him on X, and he wasn't the only one. And it escalated from there, as users reported that they were also blocked from the entire Godot engine organization on GitHub, preventing them from accessing the engine, including getting critical updates. And that included several long-term supporters, including one Titanium-level supporter. By the way, one new small game developer who was blocked is my friend Mr. Dapperton. Just saying, check out his game and go play it. Then, Godot Discord moderator Xananax, who started blocking what he called reactionary insecure cowards and filth of humanity, said that anyone who has a problem with them, quote, can fuck off to oblivion. Godot Foundation just kept making things worse, saying that blocked individuals can appeal via a Google form, which requires people to give up their Gmail addresses. And they tried claiming the Discord was unofficial, but as Games Nosh pointed out on X, oh, it's an unofficial Godot Discord now? Funny. When I looked, it was featured prominently on their website. Damage control, getting the picture of how this group operates. The creator pretended not to know what was going on, but in back channels endorsed the CM's actions. After that, the memes started flying, which is how all of this got on Know Your Meme. Sadly, the only journalist who seemed to be covering it was Brian Lunduke, who always loves to pounce on a story everyone else is ignoring. He's had a history of reporting this same behavior with other open source projects, including NixOS, OpenSUSE, Python, Elementary, GNOME, and others. He wrote, "Interestingly, Godot's team certainly seems to be in clear violation of their own code of conduct, which states the following. Aggressive or offensive behavior is not acceptable. You will be excluded from participating in the community if you insult, demean, harass, intentionally make others uncomfortable by any means, or participate in any other hateful conduct, either publicly or privately." After Godot's official statement regarding how to appeal through Google Forms, Lunduke wrote in a follow-up article, "The statement, 'We made a tweet that unexpectedly led to a wave of harassment directed at our staff,' is, based on all available evidence, simply not true. The majority of bannings enacted by Godot appear to have been directed towards people who were making statements which could not be described as harassing staff. Many were variations on 'Why not focus on software?' or 'Why are people being banned?' Likewise, the statement, 'The volume of negative engagement overwhelmed our moderation efforts,' also appears to be false. During the height of the mass cleansing, the employee responsible for community and communications for Godot openly mocked and insulted those being banned, and had enough time and energy to start a folder of the replies to Godot's actions." Yeah, probably not overwhelmed if you can do all of that. Regarding their distancing from the Discord, Lunduke wrote, "Godot appears to be distancing themselves from this moderator by stating that this was an unofficial Godot-related Discord server. However, this Discord server was listed as the official Discord server according to the Godot Foundation website as of just 3 months ago. Likewise, Xanax has been often referred to as the main moderator for multiple years, thus proving that Xanax was indeed an official moderator of the official Discord server for Godot, at least until now. The Godot Foundation is condemning the harmful language of their moderator. But what language specifically? Is Godot condemning the statement that their users are the filth of humanity who can censor it off to oblivion? We assume so, but they don't actually specify. But then the moderator of the new official Godot Discord server made an announcement where he said, quote, "Additionally, posts made by community member Xan from back in 2016 have surfaced that the Foundation had to distance itself from." Lunduke wrote, "Wait, 2016? The Godot Foundation was not condemning the new filth of humanity statements? They were condemning statements made 8 years ago? Seriously?" He dug up the statements where Xanax made several posts containing the N-word, so apparently it was those posts they were distancing themselves from, not the filth of humanity statements. Lunduke reached out to them to ask if any actions were taken against any team members, how many accounts were banned across GitHub, X, and Discord, and how many have been reinstated. After receiving no reply, he posted his questions to the new official Discord server and was blocked in less than a minute. They blocked a journalist for asking questions and deleted his message. Lunduke wrote, "As I sat there in the Godot Discord topic specifically for asking questions about this issue, I was amazed as I saw comment after comment from a wide range of users get deleted right before my eyes. More messages were deleted than were allowed to remain. Journalists, users, developers, none were allowed to ask critical questions. None allowed to express opinions contrary to the official statement from Godot. What happens now is anyone's guess, but Godot sure seems hell-bent on destroying themselves in a hurry." Well, 4 developers took Xan's advice and fucked off. Forked off. A new fork of Godot called Redo was created and is now gaining in popularity. They went from 4 people on their Discord to 4,000 in just 3 days. And apparently some people didn't like that, spamming their GitHub with bogus issues and pull requests. They posted on their official X account, "We do not hate Godot. We love Godot, which is why we want to see it thrive and fix the issues the community has been demanding for a long time. The drama that broke out was merely the catalyst that finally pushed us into action." Confirmation was Godot Foundation's hard response. "We will have to slowly transition the community away from the disappointment, frustration, and anger, understandable, towards positivity. It is simple. We love games. We love gaming. We want to enable it." And yet, quote, 1. Our GitHub is being spammed consistently with irrelevant issues and pull requests. 2. We have to be extremely cautious about PRs because of potential malicious code. 3. Some of our team are being harassed. We are not backing down, and we look forward to us being able to do this hard work. Join our Discord and show your support. And in response to accusations that they're just doing this as a quick cash grab, quote, 1. We aren't getting paid. 2. People can't even donate to us at this point and won't be able to for some months down the road. We didn't fork it for the money. 3. There seems to be a harassment campaign to smear us, sow doubt, Discord, no pun intended. 3. Yes, they said 3 twice. We forked the engine because we thought the community needed both a new place to come and build games and socialize, and have an engine that is focused on adding features the community wants, not corporate needs. If you want to join a fun community centered around a great game engine, come say hello. Thanks. All the Godot Foundation had to do was just take the criticism of the initial tweet and move on. It would have been quickly forgotten and no one would have cared. As it is, maybe they can eventually pull it out of the fire, but the massive harm they created to their own project just has to make the Godot Foundation this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this I Tolerate This Century, but I Don't Enjoy It edition of the Bogosity podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at the Discord or at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Christopher Hitchens. How dismal it is to see present-day Americans yearning for the very orthodoxy that their country was founded to escape. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Bogosity.